Good morning, y'all. This is old Jesse. You probably hear the engine running in the background, and well, it is what it is. It's kind of cold out here, a little bit frosty, and yep, I'm having spinal compression problems, and well, today's one of them days. I don't know what else to say about it. So this morning we're gonna talk a little bit about Proverbs chapter 1, and I'm only gonna read two verses, verses 6 and 7, and I'll talk about that a little bit. It's probably gonna be a little bit short this morning, but that's not so bad. So Proverbs chapter 1, verse 6. To understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and knowledge. All right. Proverbs are not clear, always very easy to understand statements. That's why sometimes they have to be interpreted, and sometimes they can be interpreted in multiple ways. These are things that a person has sat there and understood the world, gained the wisdom to know how the world works, and thought long enough on how to say it that it could be taken multiple ways. And that's kind of a complex thing, and that's just the way it is. We would like words of wisdom to be simple, but they're not always simple. Sometimes a thing needs to be said in such a way that's has a deeper meaning than the simple, and also means the simple thing, oftentimes. Not always, but very often. And so these things need to be interpreted. And that goes with, all right, if you're going to study Proverbs as a study, then you need to learn the Hebrew language, because what we read in English isn't the full connotation and context of the Hebrew. Okay, there is more than what we read in English in the Hebrew. So let's just keep that in mind. That's a thing that's all right. Yep. Now the words of the wise and their dark sayings. What does that mean? And I talked about it in the past video for the first 5 verses. Words of wisdom come from a dark place. These are experiences that human beings have had that are from life struggles, from exposure to bad things, from a deep personal struggle with philosophy or with God or with emotions, and so, it's not just, wonderful light. It's hey, it's a dark saying because it comes from a place it's yeah, I've walked through a bad time. I've seen bad stuff. I've looked into the dark, and this is what I saw, and this is the saying of it, so that you can avoid this darkness. Avoid the darkness at all costs. Don't look into the dark. Right? You don't want to know. But with that comes the thought process that, every human being is born without knowledge, is born without light in their hearts. We only know what we experience. And so you have to, learning and growing through life, you have to choose light for yourself. Otherwise, well, you'll either be left in darkness by sin, left in darkness by ignorance, left in darkness because you have no God, left in darkness because of the society around you. And so the words of the wise in these dark and their dark sayings is a thing that's like, this is from exposure to the bad, or exposure to ignorance, or exposure to lack of a God. And these sayings are to teach you what is light and what is good. So, and then comes with what comes with that is like, okay, even if you do learn these sayings, some part of it is not going to be understood by you. And so that's also why the sayings could be darkened a little bit, because it's not the easiest thing to understand the Proverbs. They're very complicated, and even at my age, having studied them for a long time, I don't completely understand the Proverbs. So it's not simple like, no, don't lie, or, don't kill or murder, or give to charity. Those are simple statements, right? But Proverbs aren't. So just keep that in mind as you study. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and knowledge. So in the Hebrew, that word for fear is terror, the terror of the Lord, the like having a very serious fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge, because you're like, whoa, being is powerful, being can kill me, being can wipe me completely out of existence and I'll never exist again. That's powerful. I've had dreams where I thought I was going to meet God, and I woke up in absolute terror. And that was because I was in a place of sin in my life. And when you study in the Bible, all the people that have seen God, all the folks that have seen God in the Bible, there is a variety of different responses based on how much sin that they perceive is in their life and in their body and in their past. And some folks, because of their conduct, are more terrified by God than others. And some view it as a joyful experience, and that's the biblical record. So we know that all humans sin. The less you sin, the more likely you are to have a deep respect for God and love and joy. For the less you sin. The more you sin, the more likely you are to either God completely turn his back on you and never look at you ever, or when you do get to see God, you're going to have a deep terror. Because, he's the creator and destroyer of all mankind, and that's a terrifying thing. That's all the power and might and majesty in all creation in one being. That's a lot. Along with it, omniscience. That's a lot of, yeah. So, the terror or the fear, deep fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. That's saying, okay, I know there's a God. That's where I need to start with my search for understanding reality, eternity, life, what to do in life. That's where you start. That's the starting point. These days, because of atheism and agnosticism, a lot of folks have a different starting point, and that starting point is there a God? Okay, so you go from is there a God to the fear of God. These things are the beginning of knowledge. Okay, and if you can't even estimate based on mathematics that there's a possibility of God, in order to find out what God or choose what God to serve, then there's a deep-seated philosophical foolishness in your mind, and there's no other way to say that. The science of today has done a great job of collecting data. We have telescopes that can measure really far, like it's something like way like a million trillion miles away. Way more. No, parsec is way longer than that. So it's like a million trillion parsecs, and that is like 100 trillion miles or some crazy number. I don't know the exact mathematics on that. So I'm just, like, we know that as far as measurable space is measured, that the universe is infinite in in height, in width, and in length. And as far as we can tell, time also seems to be infinite, both in future and in past. There's some, fiddly discussions with the Big Bang, but really science has to be like warped and curved in order to get to that theory. So based on that, and based on, just the chance of a being that's a God existing in a universe that size, and if you had to, you could say, well, evolution just continuously at some point will create a very powerful being, much powerful than a human being, and that's a God. So and don't get me wrong, I don't personally that's not part of my religious philosophy, but it is a thought process that leads you to God. And to know that a God exists is where wisdom starts, because if you reject that and you say no, then you're basically doing the stick your fingers in your ears and na 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 na, I don't want to believe it kind of thing. You're not exercising wisdom or philosophy or logic or anything that's of value. And yeah, having said that, I do have some of the atheism videos up on my shorts feed, and go look at what people say and what they think, because there's a lot of folks that are like, oh, you don't have the evidence. Well, we've collected as much as possible, and if the universe is infinite, well, we're going to keep measuring things and never find the depth of it. That's like a childish like thing. Oh, well, you can't say that you don't have evidence because we haven't found the edge. And it's like, the edge of the universe? Really? So the only evidence that you're going to accept is your own? Like, even though we've gone to the lengths that we have to measure with using the fastest means possible, and that is light. And there, so far, humanity hasn't found anything better. So there's a thing that's like, all right, you have to, at some point you have to say, okay, well, humanity's already done what it could to gather the evidence, and well, for all intents and purposes, the universe is infinite. So there's a chance, even if it's really tiny, that there's a God. So, yeah, that's a thing. It's a thing to think about. And that's the beginning of knowledge. But fools despise wisdom and knowledge. Okay? What is knowledge? Knowledge is data. That's all knowledge is. Knowledge is knowing something that's true. There's good knowledge and there's bad knowledge. Some things aren't worth knowing. Some things are. But typically, knowledge is data. It's facts. It's things that happened in the world. It could be historical. It could be religious. It could be scientific. These are the basic frameworks that we build our understanding of life on, as knowledge. So think about that, if you don't like doing wise things, you don't want to work, you want to go out and be a bum and beg for a living, well, that's not wise. The folks that do that because they can't do anything else, or because they're just not wise at all. A lot of them are sick. A lot of them are addicted to drugs. Don't be that. That would be the first thing. um, and and like it's like, a person that despises wisdom would be somebody that's like, oh, I know I'm going to hurt myself, but I'm going to spend my money on the things that I like. Okay, that's not wise. You need to save some money for yourself, for your children, for your great-grandchildren. Or it could be the religious man. Like, and this is something that I've come across in Christianity. Well, you might talk with your family and say, well, family, we need to set a trust fund up for our future generations. And so that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren can have some wealth and be prosperous. And then your wife or your parents or your brother and sister are like, no, why would we do that? That's a waste of money. It's a waste of time. They're going to spend it all anyway, and it's going to be ruined. It's like, no, a wise person will do that for the next generation so that the next generations have a chance to become wiser and wealthier and more prosperous, and that's a good thing, no matter if they waste it or not. So be careful, because like the things that you think, like, this person is wise or that person's wise, the answers that you get from other human beings, they may be wise in one subject, but really like not very wise at all on a different subject. And and so that's a thing that's like, all right, well, be careful. We're all fools in some way. And some of us are not wise at all. And the reason for that is we start as children, as babies, and we grow into grown-ups, adults, and we start with no knowledge. So even if you're older, you're going to lack somewhere in wisdom in your life because you haven't collected the right kind of knowledge or the right kind of wisdom, or haven't been able to apply it enough in your life to see the good for it. So that's the other thing. But the last thing is, like, how can a fool despise knowledge? Well, look at kids, Some kids don't like school at all. Some kids love school. They like learning. That's a wise child. But an unwise child is one that refuses to learn. It's a foolish child that rejects the base knowledge that our society has collected to teach them. So, yes, those folks do exist. It's the same in the workforce. Like, you go to work, and some people, they do their job every day but don't choose to learn about their job. And that's a lot of times why the bosses become bosses, is because they're the ones that are willing to learn, and also willing to be socially acceptable or found acceptable by their bosses. It's not necessarily brown nosing. It's, I do what I can to be found acceptable by the management. And that's not wrong, unless you are doing something wrong. Complicated subject, that one. So consider it. Think about these things. Be a wise person. Absorb knowledge. Love wisdom. And don't reject it. But if it's something that you don't maybe like agree with, say, all right, I don't particularly like that right now. I'm going to think about this for a while and see if I can understand it, and I will watch the way the world is until either it makes sense and I agree with it, or until I understand it a different way. Like, don't just immediately throw away a saying that you don't like. And that's something that I've had to do over the span of my life is like, just let's think about some things. So, all right then, that's a thing, and yeah, it's been a good chat. All right, y'all, you have a good morning. If if you like the video, give it the old thumbs up, and subscribe, and yeah, we'll do this again tomorrow, I think. All right, y'all, have a good one.